is I4CP's Next Practices weekly call series. We've got a great guest lined up today who we'll be introducing in just a little bit, but first, a few preliminaries. If you're new to I4CP, we are a human capital research firm. We discover the people practices that drive high performance in organizations. By high performance, we mean organizations that excel in 4 areas: revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction. And we do this through case studies, but also through our core research, our surveys, where we try and tease out what the high-performing organizations, the top quartile, are doing significantly different in their HR and people practices than the bottom quartile. And then we provide that to our member organizations through reports and case studies and infographics, and share bits of it also with the broader public through venues such as this. As I mentioned, we have members. That is our sort of business model, if you will. You see here just a small sampling of our member organization. So a special welcome to anyone who's on the call today from one of our member companies. You see that they range from very large organizations like Amazon, Microsoft, 3M, Toyota, many others. They also range across all different market verticals and industries, from healthcare to financial to technology, manufacturing, and so on. We also have many smaller organizations, some smaller healthcare organizations amongst our members, other industries as well as a growing cohort of unicorn startup companies that have joined over the past several years. If you'd like to learn more about membership, just go to our website, connect with anyone who works at I4CP. We'd be happy to give you more information on joining. My name's Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP, and this week I have the pleasure of co-hosting Next Practices Weekly with my colleague Bethany Vogel. Good morning, Bethany.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. You may see me go off video at some point. Normally I'm beaming in from my Rochester, New York home office. Today I'm at a conference, and so I'm at the Mirage in Las Vegas, where my internet might not be as stable as it usually is, so I may go off video to conserve on bandwidth, but we'll see how things go. We do meet every week on Thursdays, the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. You see some of the upcoming meetings we've got. Myself and a colleague, Judy Elbers, will be presenting a session next Thursday. Then coming up on the 9th, we'll be joined by Cheryl Battles from Pitney Bowes to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've also been expanding our sessions beyond the Thursday calls to have some different dates and times for those folks that are in EMEA or in APAC, whether your organization is based in those time zones or you just have colleagues that are there. Please share that schedule of events. They're only once every few months in those cases, and they're not usually on Thursdays. They're on different days and obviously different times, early in the morning, later in the evening US time, to better accommodate folks that live in those regions. Wanted to also share something we've been talking about the last several weeks, which is our new AI and HR research. Title is HR Already Behind in the AI Revolution? There's both an executive brief that's open to all, and as well as a full report that's open to I4CP members. Zeta will put the links to those over in the chat. Also like to remind folks to keep the chat open today. We're going to have a pretty robust discussion with our guest that will be starting in just a moment. And the chat is your opportunity to ask questions of the guests as we go along, and I'll be monitoring that and curating things as we go along. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bethany to facilitate the conversation and introduce our special guest today.
Awesome. All right. Well, Andre, welcome. Very excited to have you here. You've had a really long, interesting career as a learning executive at some really interesting organizations and brands. We've got Accenture, Google, Target, Nike, Mars. So let's kick it off. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, and what we're here to talk about today.
Sure, Bethany. Well, first of all, thanks to you and the team for having me today, and thanks for everyone to take time out of their busy day to join us in this conversation. I've spent about 25 years working in the space of talent and culture in a variety of roles, from the chief learning officer to the chief talent officer. And, I always describe it as like, what's my cause? And that cause has really been to help make big companies feel small. And I'd put a finer point on that today, which is to really make work feel like less work.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, you wrote a book about this, right?
I did.
So it just came out recently. I do have it right here. I recommend it. It's a fantastic book. So tell us a little bit more about that. Like, what motivated you to write it? Why this book? And like, why now? You know?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It all started. The publisher actually came to me and said, we're really interested in adding a book on culture in this new era of work, right? In this time when coming out of COVID, everything's disrupted. We're trying to find our feet in terms of, do we work in the office or at home? And how do we add greater flexibility and more meaning to our days? And so I did what every great researcher does, just like you all, is I went out and talked to as many people as I could around this idea of like, what makes a great place to work? And in those early conversations, a couple things became really clear. I think the first one was that there's no single answer. There's some definite trends and patterns, but I was hearing all this nuance in the conversation, right, between how people describe what a great workplace was. And as they started talking more and more, I got to this point where, maybe it's not about good or bad culture, about toxic or engaging environments. Maybe it really comes down to this idea of right or wrong fit. And that was sort of the genesis of about 100 interviews with talent all over the world, asking pretty two simple questions. The first one is, tell me about a time in your life when you had right fit, or this idea of a deep and authentic connection to how a company works day to day. And then tell me a time when that wasn't true. And just these colorful, brilliant, sort of really moving stories about what it can feel like to work at a place that really works for you, and the devastation that can happen when it doesn't.
It's really interesting because you're allowing for a lot of variability there,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
everybody's different. So trying to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what became true immediately was there's both a lot of different ways that people like to work, how we like to set strategy, collaborate, solve problems, manage conflict, develop people, how we like to convene, run our calendars, how we think about rest and recovery, all these sorts of things. And in the conversation, in the slides up, when the interviews would describe these experiences, it was fascinating, right? When you had right fit, it was like they described it saying, I felt more comfortable more days. I felt like me. It was easier to laugh, right? They said things like, I was putting in hours, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like home. One of my favorite was, I never had the Sunday scaries. And I'll talk about this interview later, but in one of the interviews, a marketing director talked about this idea of, I could just practice my craft. I didn't have to let all my creative energy go to context or the coordination or trying to figure out how to do work. And then the other side is what really motivated me to wake up every day and write. And that was these wrong fit stories, these times in people's lives when they felt like they were on a Ferris wheel. They were going round and round and not getting anywhere. There's people that said, God, I felt like I was getting punched in the face a different way every single day. I didn't want to go to work. It was impacting my life, my livelihood, my time with my family. And, I would hit Sunday and I literally was depressed. And when they dug into it, it was like everybody had a secret decoder ring to success except for me. So what they were saying is that they were watching people who looked like them or had the same experience as them or had the same background and education. And these other people were succeeding when they felt like they were slogging through mud every day. And again, it was just, that was the hook, between these stories. And then, that big number by Gallup that estimated $7.9 trillion of lost productivity that sits in our companies due to disengagement. I was just motivated to try to figure out how to help.
I just want to jump in and note on a couple of these quotes that are on the right, the wrong fit ones. That one, both of which you noted, it was like being punched in the face every day in a different way. If it was just being punched in the face every day, you could develop defenses, workarounds, etc. But in a different way, it would make it so that you really can't get around it. And then similarly, everyone seemed to have a secret decoder ring for success, except for me. Again, if there was such a thing, you could grasp for it, you could find it, you could find workarounds, get around it. But if there isn't one, then it's going to be different every day, and it's just going to seem like a hopeless Sisyphusian, putting the ball up the hill and having it roll back down constantly. So I found those two sort of connect to each other in a dire way.
Yeah, Tom, they really do. And one of the things, we use a really easy analogy in the book. We have everyone in the book write the sentence, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog with their dominant hand. And then we have them do the same exercise with their non-dominant hand and talk about how that felt. It's the visceral feeling they have when they're in wrong fit, right? Is that I feel less confident. I feel less competent. My work's sloppy. It's frustrating. I feel stressed out. And no matter how many times I write that sentence, it's never going to be as good as if I was writing with my dominant hand. And I think that simple sort of analogy, that simple exercise really tells us a lot about viscerally how this feels when people are in this place, when they want desperately to be a success, but because of the way the company works, it feels foreign to them.
So, I mean, I think we all can sit here and relate to a lot of these experiences, both on like right fit and wrong fit. But if you're a leader in a company, how do you identify this, right? How do you see that an employee is a right fit or a wrong fit? Like, and like, how is it different than fitting in too?
Yeah, so let's start with the fitting in piece, because this is a part of the book. Again, we address it up front. I do, because the word fit can be divisive, right? For many marginalized groups in the world over many years, they've had to fit in every single day, try to change who they are, how they look, how they dress, how they talk, how they do all these things. And there's a lot of really brilliant minds in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging that are working in that space, and we need to be working harder than we are today to create a stronger sense of belonging. What the nuanced part of this book takes on is there's both who we are, those attributes that make us us that sometimes we have to fit in on, and then there's how we work, right? And when we talk about how we work, it's literally, imagine walking into a company on a random Tuesday morning and just go to work. It's how do we collaborate? How do we solve problems? How do we socialize ideas? How do we manage conflict, give feedback, develop people, all those things? There's a way that companies do that when they're at their best. And I've been in a lot of these companies now, right? Target works very different than Nike, very different than Google, very different than Mars. And so often what we're finding is when, as leaders, we put people in these systems, when we start to judge their performance, we make it about whether or not you personally are a success. That is, are you good at what you do? When in fact, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to bet it has nothing to do with whether or not I'm competent. It has to do with the way the company works just doesn't work for me. And if we could have that conversation, if we could be much more transparent on the front end about how the company actually works, not the aspirations we tend to give people, if we could train people on how the company works at its best, give them the tools and structures to sit down in a seat and be great, and then give them feedback around, hey, this is the way that we like to work. Here's how you like to work. How do we find a common ground? I just feel like there would be so much less emotion in the conversation. I mean, some of these folks I talk about in Wrong Fit, we're talking about super successful CEOs of large companies. And they still hold on to that moment when it was a wrong fit and talk about it as almost destroying their career. They still were hanging on to it. And once they had this structure around, maybe it was just about how I like to work versus how the company liked to work, you saw them like viscerally release stress. And so, it just feels like there's a really interesting conversation we can have.
That's fascinating. So, I mean, I hear you saying that like right fit really goes both ways. So I want to get to that in a second, but maybe to set up the context for that, tell me a little bit more about some of these trends that have been happening over the past few years and both how talent and companies have viewed the world. Like, how have we gotten to this place where we're at today?
Yeah, so these are trends I put in the book just because they were things on my mind as I was watching this idea of, God, that $7.8 trillion of lost productivity. 1 in 3 new joiners are leaving their company in the first 90 days. Even people that stay, 53% of them keep looking for a job. I'm like, there's just something that's not working for us in work. And these were some of the things that were consistently coming up, right? I'll talk about a few of them. Some of them are obvious, but this rise of a culture deck, way back in the early 90s with some of the tech companies, we started to treat our companies as brands. They became marketing efforts, right? These beautiful branded decks about how wonderful these places are to work. And they can sometimes set unreal expectations, right? If we sell on the aspiration and then I come into the company and it doesn't fit, I've just started to destroy engagement in day one, right? The second one is this decade of decadent growth. We are exiting, I think the most consistent consecutive quarters of growth in the GDP in the United States in any period in time, right up until about 2020, when we hit COVID. In that time, we sort of growth hides sins, right? We were able to construct ways of working that maybe weren't the most effective, maybe weren't the best for everybody. And we really weren't innovating in the ways that we could around the ways of working and how companies are created. Now, COVID changed all that, right? All of a sudden, we had to blow up everything. There's also this fourth one of this age of infinite browsing. One of my favorite books I've read, and I've read it probably 4 times now, is called Dedicated by Pete Davis. And it talks about this crisis of commitment. This idea that everybody, due to social media and all this comparison we do, we're always infinitely browsing. That is, we have this constant FOMO, right? We can look out in the world at someone's experience and think that they have it better, that they're getting paid more, they have a better job, a better manager, a better place to work, more perks, better ping pong tables, all the things. And the reality is, it's not that simple, and it probably isn't true. And then the last one is just, and I loved coming out of COVID, of the many hardships we had, the one thing that I was really sort of stunned by was how many people started to search for meaning. They started to ask the question of like, what is my time worth? What is my energy worth? And what do I want out of my day to day? And how can I find something that's just a little bit better? It led to the Great Resignation, but still you're seeing these trends in the tight labor market of people really asking that question of, if it's not meaningful, why am I doing it? And there are many times, and I want to make sure we land this point before we go on, Bethany, that a job is just a job, right? We need to get paid. We're raising family. I have 2 kids in college. I have to have a paycheck. Right. So sometimes a job is just a job, but in the moments when it's not, in the moments when we get to choose, I wrote this book to just say, let's be a little bit more careful about what we're paying attention to and how we're sort of getting to the bottom of how a company works day to day.
Yeah, gives you an opportunity to be a little bit more thoughtful. I help run and facilitate a lot of the communities here at I4CP for our members. And this has been a really, really big topic this year as we are all searching for meaning. So knowing, these are the places that we're all coming from as we go into having these conversations about a right fit or wrong fit. We were just talking about how it's both the company and the talent.
It is.
And so what's happening right now that creates that mismatch? And how do you go about that conversation of figuring out the right fit, a right match?
Yeah, well, let's start with talent, right? Because I think we're all talent first, regardless of if we're leaders. We all have that in common. So through the interviews, one of the final questions I asked everybody was, hey, if you could rewind the clock, if you could go back to the moment before you took that job that wasn't a right fit, what would you have told yourself to do? And the thing that came up again and again and again was this idea of, I would have done a lot deeper reflection on what I am personally solving for. Who am I? What do I value? What do I care about? What's the problem I'm trying to solve? What's the life I want 10 years from now? Everybody said that they started the job search by looking at a job ad. And as soon as you do that, you're in a marketing machine, right? And so in the book, we created these excursions, these reflective exercises to sort of say, before you do anything, before you leave the company you've invested in, before you go and look for a job, just get to know yourself a little bit better. And so we put these 8 exercises in, and they really range from an excursion around values. Really, what values do you actually use when you make big decisions? Very different than what we say we value. All the way down to like, what would your ideal company be if you could create it from scratch? How would it work? through to your ideal manager, and then ends in sort of this narrative that you have about yourself that then can become your litmus test, right? How much does this company this job I'm looking at, this team I'm looking to join, match these things that I say I care about?
Interesting. Um, so I know one of the excursions that you talked about, and I actually went through and did it as well, is the lived value ladder.
Yep.
And I think what's really interesting, so you just hit on it though, but like a difference between what we say our values are versus like how we make those decisions. Can you hone in on that a little bit more and tell me like what that is and why that's important?
Yeah, I really will. The thing about values, and that happens at the organizational level and at the talent levels, we want to believe we can value all of these things. I value teamwork and collaboration and innovation and risk taking and all these greatest hits of values that everyone's supposed to care about. But in the end, values come to play in the moments of big decisions, right? So at a personal level, when you're buying a house, when you're taking a job, when you're deciding who you're going to marry, there's a certain architecture and hierarchy to your values. You might hold 10 values, but 2 or 3 matter more than any other. And hey, this actually exercise was born out of just experiences with myself, right? When someone asked me what I value, I would always say, I value innovation. I value risk taking. I value collaboration. I value, all these sorts of energy producing areas. And when I look back at my decisions and actually talk to my wife, there's 3 things I value above anything else. I value financial security, I value safety, and I value my family. I don't value, those other things are important to me. I love them. I wish I was that person. But in the end, if I look at all the big decisions, the colleges I went to, the jobs I took, the places I lived, those were the 3 biggest values that follow me everywhere. And this excursion, like many of them, is just helping us to see the signal through the noise so we can sort of differentiate what matters to us over the long haul versus what might just be exciting to us or what we wish we were.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Um, and it can be hard to step back and look at a situation and really try and figure out what do I aspire for versus what does this actually look like. And I know sometimes there are also some psychological barriers that
Mm.
that can come up that prevent us from really retaining that right fit. What are those?
Yeah, Bethany, this is the part that for me as an organizational psychologist, I was really fascinated by, like, all these brilliant people, all these, just leaders I would idolize, all had these wrong fit experiences, which means that none of us are immune. And so there's a couple things that happen, right? If you think about an interview process, it is basically like a first date, right? Everybody is on their best behavior, right? The company comes in, you're getting interviewed by a manager who's prep, knows you, knows your resume. They'll talk through the values. You've got these beautifully poetic recruiters and these career sites. And so the company's presenting the best possible aspirational version of themselves. And then talent does the same thing. Our resumes are polished. We practiced our answers to the 10 top questions you get asked in the interviews. We show up in our best clothes. And when you think about it, like, you just step back from the idea that interviews are more like first dates. Ask yourself how many first dates resulted in really long-term healthy relationships. We actually make decisions on jobs with probably less objective information than we would to buy our next toaster. And the thing is, the reason this matters to me more than anything is we will spend almost 13.5 of our adult lives every second, every day, every month, every year at work. It's second to only sleep. It's more than our friends, more than our family, more time than anything else other than sleep. And so when you think about that, I'm just sitting here saying, all of us, the next time we make a decision, let's think really, really hard, because that's a lot of time, right? It's the biggest commitment we will likely make. And to put yourself in a place where you're riding with your dominant hand every day, it just makes life magic, right? We know it. And so I just, I want people to do a little bit more of that exploration. So hopefully they can have a little bit better chance of finding a place that works for them.
Andre, I'll jump in here and just note that people in the chat, a lot of what you're saying is really resonating with folks. Certainly this first date syndrome analogy is, but some of the earlier concepts as well. Want to go back to one point you made as sort of a caveat. Debbie asked in the chat, she says, so engagement is out and meaning is in. How do we give space to the staff who say they are just doing their job? You had made that point that, yeah, at some points in your life, a job is just a job. And so she asks, if they have no need to explore their values for good fit, how do we give them space and have that balance across the employee population?
It's a great question, Debbie. I love it. And one of the things, I started my career in a steel company up in Cleveland. I was doing assessments for team leaders, for shift leaders for the line. And I'll never forget, it was one of the most important sort of moments in my career, just from a lessons of experience standpoint. I was meeting these individuals who had the raw skills to be amazing leaders, right? And every one of them was turning down the opportunity to interview for the shift leader job. It was more money, it was more pay, it was more responsibility. And I was young at that point, and I was dumbfounded. And one of them sat me down and just said, he goes, hey, I come to work. I work really hard. I'm here from 8 until 5 because work is a means to a different end for me. I come here so I can leave and go do the things that matter to me more than anything else. And so I guess the short answer is these excursions are great for individuals looking for jobs. They are unbelievable tools for managers to use to find out at a deeper level what is motivating the people that work for you. And if they're coming to work at 8 o'clock, leaving at 5 and working really hard so they can just go, then we should support them, just like we'll support the person that wants to spend 60 or 70 hours building their career and creating this great craft. They all matter to the system. I just think sometimes we don't see the person behind the job. We walk into these companies and we become a really narrow version of ourselves, right? We become the job that we're in. All of a sudden, all these other skills, all these motivations, all these other things I can do are just gone. And so I think if we can use these questions to just get a little bit more depth, we'll understand, why are people walking through the door? Why are they coming to your company? Why are they here and what do they need? And that can help us just be a little bit better in terms of creating that meaning, whatever the definition is for them.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of teeing us up of like, okay, so what does that look like? So I see Cecilia in the chat. She asks like, okay, how would you transform the interview process? And like, why do we have HR professionals being the first in the process of interviews? What should that look like? How do we make that process effective? What do you think?
Well, Bethany, let's start with your first question, which is what's in the way, right? A psychological factor that gets in our way is confirmation bias, and we all know it. But in an interview process, here's how it goes: is there's this entire truth available to us about what a company is, what a job is, who the manager is, how they like to work, the annual reports, all these different things. And then there's a decision we want to make, right? And we know that with confirmation bias, what happens is it narrows our focus. And so we tend to only pay attention to information that's going to confirm the decision we want to make. And so many of the interviewers I had for the book, what they told me was, I asked them, when did you know? When did you know that this decision you made was probably wrong? And literally 9 out of 10, they'd pause, they'd smile, and they'd say, I knew it in the interview. I knew it in the interview, and I ignored it because I wanted the better pay. I wanted the better title. I just wanted to be wanted, and this company wanted me. And then they look back at that and they said, you know what? Here's where it went wrong. Is one, we don't ask the best questions as interviewees. We don't get deep into the company. We rely a little bit too much on subjective forms of information. That is information the company gives us as opposed to objective information from the outside. And third, I think, the interview process needs to be less like a first date and more like a family reunion. And what do I mean by that? companies have got to start presenting a more authentic version of what it's like to work there every day. What's it like to work in this company, in this team on a random Thursday morning in October? And then I think creating those realistic job previews, one of the things in the book I talk about, and this may not be the right solution, but I wish job descriptions did this. I wish the first thing on a job description was, here's the way we like to work. Are we your brand of crazy? Right? And then you say, if so, click to the next piece of this. Do you have one of these 6 capabilities that we need? If so, hey, is it one of your superpowers to do one of these 3 or 4 deliverables? If so, come and work here. We'll figure out the rest once you're here. Like, that feels like a better way to get people in the door who will not just be a fit for the company, not just have capability that you need, but they're going to be able to do the 1 or 2 things that are really at core to the job right now. Because job descriptions today, I mean, Bethy, you know this, you read them all the time, is they're like literally the entirety of every bullet point of everything a person could do in a decade of a job. And then what happens, you get in there and you find out it's not actually any of those things. It's only these 3 things. And by the way, there's these 6 other things we didn't put on the job description that you'll actually have to do as well. And that right there is where we create that mismatch of expectation. What I thought I was buying, what I thought I was coming in to do, on the first few days, I realized that isn't true. And so what we do to our employees is this, right? The day before I take a job, and you all think back to the day before you took your last job. If you talk to your mom or your dad or your partner or your best friend, you were so excited, so jazzed, so over the top, ready to go that you could hardly help yourself. And then literally you get in there and you find out that this expectation you had isn't quite as true on that first day of orientation. This looks a little different than I thought it did. You get out into your job and it feels even more different. And right there is a big part of the $7.9 trillion of lost productivity. Instead of engagement going up from day 0 to day 90, it actually heads down, right? As we find out the aspiration and reality really don't often line up. And no one's doing this with ill intent, right? Nobody. Companies aren't doing that to pull the wool over our eyes, right? What happens in companies as they grow is think about Google, right? When I was there, at one of the years I was there, we hired 27,000 people, right, in a year. And so you think about that's 27,000 people coming in. They're bringing their technical skill. They're bringing their minds. They're bringing your brilliance. You know what else they're bringing? Their favorite work principles, their favorite work practices, their favorite work platforms. And so as companies grow, unless we do a really good job of reminding people how we work when we're at our best, a really good job, we end up just becoming this amalgamation of all these different ways that people learned how to work somewhere else. And that's why it starts to feel confusing and all our creative energy is going to coordination instead of our craft.
So I want to call out, just your idea of like this perfect job description, because I felt like that was a really neat way to approach it, of first talking about the way we work, right? Then talking about like the capabilities that we need, because I love that, because organizations, as they're thinking about the future, they're thinking about what capabilities and what skills do we need that we don't have, and they're looking at it by role, right? So it connects to our workforce planning there. And then you get into like the deliverables and the day-to-day of like, okay, here's what you're doing, which I love that. So when I back up to like the way that we work, like give me like a tangible example. Like what's an example of a way that we work?
So remember, I talked about this at the top of the show. These are things, and they're in the book. We actually have an assessment of probably 97 different ways that people work. And they range from how we collaborate, how we solve problems, manage conflict, develop people. I'll give you a really simple one for me is how we socialize ideas. There are some companies in the world that when you want to try to get buy-in to an idea, you have to create a beautiful brand ready deck. It has to have awesome visuals and cool colors and poetic, pithy statements, right? Then there's places you go that they want a 2-page memo, full sentences, and as little as you can possibly write on 2 pages to give us as much depth as we can get. And then there's places that actually want a 26-page research paper, right? Before we're going to do anything. And often, like, we don't know what that looks like coming in. And I will tell you, I mean, I've had a wonderful career at some of the best places I could ever hope to work. And there were a few that really worked for me, right? The way that you socialize ideas is just natural for me. And then there were a lot that I had to learn. And every time I had to learn, again, it's riding with my non-dominant hand. I could do it. I could get better at it, but I was never at my best. So I'd walk into these high pressure situations, big budgets on the line, and I've got one hand tied behind my back. And so you're just not as effective over time. So that's one of those that's really tangible. And I think all of us face into that. And we've all been in that situation. And here's the deal. Like, the thing I'd say about it, Bethany, that I get really compelled by is never forget that your creative energy is flowing every single day, every second, all the time. It's just a question of what it's flowing to, right? If you're in a place that works, it's all flowing to craft, this thing that you're trying to be better than anyone else in the world in. If you're in a place that doesn't work, or you're asked to fit in on whatever factors you have to do that, your creative energy is going to things like managing negative emotions, creating protective narratives and stories that allow you to keep your self-respect. It's going to coordination of work and trying to learn how to work in a way that's foreign to you. But it's always flowing, folks. And right now I have this feeling that, you know, our creative energy is going to context more than it's going to our craft in a time when we just need everybody at their best, right? It's so complex right now. It's so hard. And so again, I just hope that's part of what people can take out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, your book is aimed at both, talent and companies. So, what can companies do to create a better fit for its talent? So, it's kind of a broader question. And then to that degree, in a more specific question, so you just talked about like the ways that we work. I'm also imagining organizations saying, well, it depends on what part of the organization you're in, right? Like, we do all three of those things when we're trying to socialize ideas. And so as a company, like, do we get aligned? Does it work for us to do different things, different places? What do we do?
Yeah, Bethany, let's stay there, and then we'll get to the buffers you put on the sheet. Don't take it back
Okay.
down, because I want to say this is one of the things that's happening today more than ever is that, you know, rarely is work done in silos or verticals any longer,
Right.
right? Unless you're in a holding company that has like 7 different companies underneath it, work happens on the horizontal, right? Multiple people from multiple functions have to touch something in order for a new product to get out the door, a new service to get out the door, a new technology to get out the door. And so gone are the days where we can work in our own silo in our own way. And that's why it's hard right now. Imagine if I'm trying to help an executive team get aligned on a new approach to learning and development. If Bethany wants to see a 2-page memo and Tom wants to see a pithy deck and Zeta wants to see a research paper, I literally will lose my mind trying to get you all to get aligned to see information the same way. And so, yes, I think there's probably a place where companies need to get back to asking the question of, how do we work when we're at our best, collectively at our best? And let's start putting in structures and training to help people understand how to show up in these rooms and in these teams in the best possible way. And it's not 100%, it's 80, 70, but better than we're doing today. And then the other thing is, and this came up from the interviews as well, is asking our interviewers, hey, when you were in a hard fit, or when the earth shifted below you and what was once right no longer felt that way, what can you do, both as a leader or for yourself? And that's where these buffers came from. And there's 2 groups. There's inspirational buffers and there's relational buffers. And the inspirational buffers are, you know what, one thing that I found in every situation is that when you could connect somebody to purpose, that is, why is the world better with our company in it, connect them to consumers, give them a little bit more meaningful work, or help them create a more legitimate relationship with time, they will tend to have greater fit, more commitment, and longer duration of your company. The relationship with time is an interesting one, right? Because when we start to feel under pressure, like we're not succeeding, what do we all do? We work harder. We pull more time from our family, more time from our lives, more time from the things that actually feed us, right? And we end up putting ourselves in a high stress, low energy situation, which just is then that spiral of why things start to unravel pretty quickly. And then the relational buffers were really interesting for me too, right? Again, this connection to consumers, a supportive leader or manager, we know from Gallup that matters. Workplace BFFs, if you haven't read that New York Times article on early best friends at work, please do. It's an amazing article. One of my favorites, though, that's not on this list is doppelgangers. And so one of the things that I was thinking about as I came through these interviews on Wrong Fit, and it was the person that talked about this idea of a secret decoder ring for success. If you can find your doppelganger, right? A doppelganger is we all have a twin in the world, right? That looks like us. What I'm talking about is your workplace doppelganger, someone who has the same experience set as you do. They might have the same educational background as you are. They might have the same sort of career path that you followed. They might even have the same job. And if you can find someone that fits those factors and they're different in one place, which is they are a success in this company and you're not, don't leave. Don't leave, because it's probably coming down to maybe a toxic leader, maybe a dysfunctional team, maybe you're in the wrong role. But if you can find that doppelganger, there's a good chance that that company works the way you like to work. And this is why it's important, right? I'm all for job hopping. I've changed jobs a lot because I've been trying to build this craft and see a lot of systems. But the one thing I think we don't realize is there's a real under the radar cost to job hopping. You take with you your skills, you take with you your tools, you take with you your experiences, but you set a bunch of stuff back to zero. You lose your network, you lose your reputation if it's good or bad, you lose the insider knowledge and language, right? And those things, they take energy, time, and effort to recreate. So every time you jump, your next 2 years is rebuilding those things, probably not practicing or getting better at your craft, because again, we have limited creative energy. So I just look at these things. I'm like, if you're questioning whether or not you fit, take a harder look at yourself. Try to put some of these buffers in place. If you have a team that's struggling, as a manager, you can use these assets as well. And maybe, just maybe, we can keep people in place. Let them see that we're building towards a better future and get everyone in a right fit situation.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like there's a little bit of a juxtaposition between, like, you want to find the right fit, but then we're also talking about like navigating through the wrong fit, and there are challenges to job hopping. So what do we do? Do we move? Do we stay?
Well, I think here's what I would say to you is you're going to face a lot of inflection points in your career, right? A company that works for you one day might go through a radical transformation, and you might walk in the next week and it might feel completely different. You might get a new leader and they might put in a whole different way of working. All these things happen. I think the larger point is this: at each inflection point, just don't rush. Make sure you're taking a deep breath, you're taking 3 steps back, you're opening your eyes really wide, and you ask yourself, what am I solving for right now? And that's kind of the point is, you know what? Work's fluid. Companies are growing, right? Systems are changing, and we're actually becoming different as well. And so I always tell people, I'm like, you should be doing this work every quarter, at least once a year, no matter how things are going. Because the other thing that doing that sort of self-reflection helps you do, it'll help you not leap because the shiny title or better pay, which we know neither of those things are linked to long-term job satisfaction after a certain point. So they just allow you to remember why you're there. And there's this interesting sort of idea of when you're applying for a job, right? It's all excitement. They want me. It's a new title. It's a new place. It's all dopamine, right? We're just getting this like super energetic feeling that's linked to neurotransmitters in our brain. It's very different than what you get if you're in a deep, long-lasting, committed relationship, because that's not dopamine. That's oxytocin. It's like a warm hug. And I'm kind of sitting here wondering for myself and everyone else, I'm like, sometimes I wonder if I mistook that warm hug for boredom for a lack of momentum, for not getting to sort of broaden my horizons in the way that I want, when in fact, maybe the compounding interest of reputation and network and alignment to ways of working and purpose, maybe over time, that acceleration curve would have been a lot faster if we would have just given it a chance.
That's very interesting. And I think a lot of the excursions in your book will give you the reflection time and space to recognize where you're really at.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope they do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I really do think that they do. So I have just a couple more questions for you. We've talked a lot again about the talent, but I do have a question on like why is it so hard for companies to train employees on how the work really gets done?
There's a couple things happening, Bethany, right? One is, and I feel for them, right? I've been in these positions and watching companies grow, is growth puts pressure on culture, right? And as you're growing, you need people to go from one experience to the next. You need them to move very quickly. And as we add more people, again, they're bringing their backpack of all that cultural baggage. You just put on this this really interesting, probably one of the most fascinating piece of research I've seen in a long time, which was MIT and Culture 500 looked at these espoused values of a company, right? So they basically took annual reports, took emails, took communications, and sort of captured how often are certain words said by certain leaders in certain companies. And they formed a hierarchy of values. If you said innovation 75,000 times, innovation was assumed to be a really important value to your company, right? And then they compared those espoused values to the lived experience of people on the employee review sites. Now, we know that often those are disfranchised people, so it's not the cleanest data set. What was really interesting, though, as a researcher, you'll appreciate this, zero correlation between the two. Often a negative correlation of what's being espoused and what actually the lived experience is. So even if it's 20%, it's not good enough. And so something's happened to companies where, because of growth, because of everything we're dealing with, we've failed to re-recruit people back to the principles, practices, and platforms that make this company great. I mean, how many of us work in a company that you walk in and there's like 97 different project management softwares, right? We only need one. And if we all had one, imagine how much easier it is to manage projects, because I don't have to go across all these different platforms to try to keep a sense on what's going on in the world. And so I think the best companies know how they work. They re-recruit people, if not on the way in, at least once a year. And I just think those cycles are getting faster and faster, right? The more we're hybrid, the more we're remote, the more we have to re-recruit people back to, why is the world better with us in it? How do we make money? How does your job actually fit in this system? How do we do work? Principles, practices, and platforms. And last but not least is, what is our unwavering promise to you as employees for coming and putting those 13.5 years of your life to work for me? And I just don't know that we've been very good or very diligent about asking those questions, honestly. And if we did, I wonder if a lot of the issues we're seeing start to fade away a little bit.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot around here of simplifying. I work with the performance management community, and even this last year, I think that's what they were getting to, is like, we just need to find a way to be able to simplify it. But I love how it's not simplifying it, because if you just tell somebody like, okay, here's your things, like, what do you need to take away? Like that's a hard thing to do. You can't just like take things off. But what you're working here towards is, you've got a vision. And if you've got a vision of where you're going, it's a lot easier to simplify and see, what feeds that vision, what feeds that goal.
I always say, like, and I've been saying this for years, strategy isn't developed, it's participated in or not. And often, if we're not really clear at that highest level about all those things, how we work, why the world's better than us, how we make money, and what our promise is for you, we leave it to chance whether or not the decisions everybody makes every day is actually helping us reach that goal. And I'll tell you, like 9 times out of 10, I don't think we are.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're not clear, we're making decisions that probably are running counter to the kinds of things that the company needs us to be doing. And it's, again, just not from a lack of interest in wanting that to be true. It's just we're not really good at re-recruiting and communicating the way we need to build that deep sense of commitment.
Yeah, interesting. So, okay, kind of related to this,
Okay.
I4CP has been focused on productivity of
Yep.
employees, right? We did a big research, and I've heard you talk a lot about it as well. So, how do you think organizations need to look at and assess the productivity of their employees from this lens?
I'll start from the top, which is, $7.9 trillion of lost productivity is bigger than the market cap of Amazon, Apple, and Google combined.
Wow.
So you could have 3 companies of that size in the world right now doing something that I hope would bring great value. And so I guess the short answer is I don't know, but we all got to work harder on it. A couple things that are important to me personally is one, setting deliverables for a year feels archaic to me at this point, right? With so much chaos and so much instability and so much growth in so many sectors, I would say, like, let's really start narrowing down to cycles that are quarter by quarter. And if you don't have to, reconstitute those, you just keep working. But this idea of like, just look at the next 3 months. Don't try to look at the year. It's too overwhelming.
Yep.
Right. And then all these things start to get on the plate that we're either not ready to do, they shouldn't come right now, they need to be backed out of. I think the second thing that we have to sort of do a better job is get rid of all the lost creative energy that's going to the coordination of work. Again, I hate to harp on this slide that's up in front of me, but I just see it every day. I see all of our execution teams having to spend their energy on alignment, and we're just wasting energy, and it's finite. Human energy is finite, right? Our ingenuity isn't, but our energy is. And so we have to be able to sort of set a little bit clearer left and right boundaries so that energy gets utilized in a smart way. And so again, I'll tell you a story back. I talked about at the beginning, this marketing director I was working with, creative person, right? Creative people love freedom. And that's a myth, right? What creative people actually love is they love constraint. And so she said she worked at a CPG company, and she said, I got there and literally they had a standard operating procedure for everything. They had one deck template that you could use to do your stuff in. And at the start, she was like, I wanted to fight against it. I wanted to create my own way, my own thing, my own deck. And then she realized by them giving me that very specific way of working, all my energy could go to the content that I'm going to put in there. And she's like, every day I was getting smarter and better at the thing that I cared about most. And the things that I was sort of wasting time in, mucking around with, they went away. And she said, I learned the importance of this very thing that we're talking about, which is to have standardized principles, practices, and platforms allows brilliant people to practice their craft more often in more days, which in the end has got to end in more productivity, I would assume.
Yeah, I think sometimes some degree of structure like that can be very powerful to free up the creativity within that structure. I've always liked the analogy of giving people a track to run on.
Yeah.
You're an analogy guy. You've got a lot in your book, and you've shared a lot of them with us today. And that's always been one of my favorites. And that came to mind with what you were just describing. If you give people a track to run on, then they can really excel and run faster.
I love that, Tom. And it's such a great, sports analogies are always hard for people, but this one compels me from the standpoint of, if I'm on a track, I know what I'm trying to do. I know how far I'm trying to go. And so all my energy can get better at that very narrowed thing you're asking me to be able to do. And that, the analogy works really well. If you put a sprinter, in the middle of a grass field, it's much harder to purely practice technique because they're worried about all these other factors, like I'm going to sprain my ankle by falling into a rabbit hole, so yeah. I really like the analogy. It works in this instance for sure.
In that instance. Yep. We've only got a few minutes left, and I did want to surface one question that just came in the chat from Allison. And it's about seasoned leaders. Seasoned leaders, they got there a certain way of working, probably from multiple companies, but maybe just growing up in one organization. So she's asking, do you think that seasoned leaders at the top of companies can shift to this more employee-centered thinking, this approach? Have you seen it work in some cases when you've presented some of these ideas to them? Do they get the wake-up call, or is it a real challenge?
I think they both get the wake-up call, and it's a real challenge. Right. So, I started my career at the Center for Creative Leadership, and one of the foundational parts of their philosophy was the difference between leaders who excel over time and those that are hero to zero. They go, 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 and then they fall off the cliff. Is that the latter group was actually just rinsing and repeating a very singular, very rote way of doing work. They only knew one way to do it. Right. The best leaders, they continue to grow and develop and find new edges. And that idea of taking lessons of experience, key events, and turning them into lessons of experience has always stood with me. And so I'd say this to you, I think it's a great question. They're scared. Like, leaders don't know how to lead in this world anymore. COVID shook every leader to their core for a variety of reasons. And now with this new era of work, and with meaning and purpose and productivity and all these things coming, and the complexity of the world we're living in, leadership's a hard job. And I think the best are sitting there saying, hey, the only thing I can do is pull really smart people together and help them find the best idea. And then when they do, I got to support them to get it done. I think the ones that are struggling are trying to rinse and repeat in a time that's not going to allow them to do that any longer. It's going to be a pretty big reckoning of leadership, I think, in the next decade.
I want to continue this conversation with you because I feel
That's
like
so
we just opened like a whole new door there. But I'll pull you into our leadership development community of practice that maybe we can continue that. But for the folks who want to stay connected with you, with the work that you're doing, find out a little bit more, what's the best way to go about that?
You have some of them up here. So I do a weekly newsletter meant to just help make your week a little bit easier. It's called mondaymatters.substack.com. It's really practical, really built to say, hey, over your morning cup of coffee, here's an easy way and a few things that will help you start on the right foot. And of course, there's gifts, and I do book reviews and haiku and a lot of fun stuff that hopefully will make you smile as you walk into your workday. Wrongfitrightfit.com. That's where you can find me. You can find more about the book. You can find more of the assets I share. If you ever need help from me, speaking, consulting, coaching, I do a lot of that as well. And then if you just want to talk more, I'm still collecting stories every week because we've got to just keep getting smarter. And so, look me up on Andre at theshiftSpace.com. And if you want to have a conversation, tell me your story. I'm happy to do it. I'm here to help. You got to make work less work.
I love it, Andre. Well, hey, thank you so much for chatting with us today. We really appreciate it. Tom, I'll hand it off to you.
Well, I'll second that. Thank you, Bethany, for leading a great conversation. And thank you, Andre. Lots of great insights. You've gotten a lot of thumbs up and hearts and hand clap emojis over in the chat throughout, particularly all the analogies and just sort of interesting turns of phrases and new concepts for people. I think a lot of people will be sharing the recording of this one, maybe with some colleagues at their company or other people they know, some of their LinkedIn connections where maybe they're facing a career pivot or career crisis. I think this will be a session in particular that folks will want to watch the recording of. So thank you, Andre.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. I wish you the best.
So a couple of quick final notes here. These Next Practice Weekly sessions are available for HRCI and SHRM recertification credit hours. So if that is relevant for you, just jot down the relevant program ID or activity ID. And then lastly, if you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the other ones we've had recently on Next Practice Weekly, you can get things like that and a lot more by coming to our Next Practices Now conference in person, which will be March 25th through the 28th in Scottsdale, Arizona. We hold this conference every March. You see here a sampling of some of the great speakers we'll have. We'll have book authors and thought leaders, as well as some CEOs, as well as CHROs from some great organizations. So to learn more, go to i4cp.com/conference. People are registering already. We've got hundreds registered, many more to come. So check that out. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. Join us again next week, same time, Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. And until then, have a great rest of your week and weekend. Bye-bye now.